I want to share something with you. This is one of my favorite quotations. It's by an Indian author named Jiddu Krishnamurti. And he says this. He says, all you can do is to alter your relationship with the world. Not the world of Europe or America, but the world of your husband, the world of your wife, the world of your home, the world of your work. And there you can bring change, and then that change will move in wider and wider circles. And I think if I look in this room, I can see lots of people who want to alter their world in some way. I think that probably everybody here would love to be able to create a really great marriage or a really close-knit family. I assume that probably everybody here would love to be able to go to a workplace every day where people feel highly satisfied, feel a great sense of fulfillment, feel valued and respected. And I think inside all of us probably, I assume that everybody here would love to see a more peaceful world, a place that's not divided by race or ethnicity or gender or even a political party. The truth, though, is that we may not know how to alter our social worlds. And what I want to do today is just share some really small, concrete, practical ways about how you can go about changing and altering the world that Krishnamurti was kind of describing. I'm a professor of communication. Yesterday I found out that I had a new title, though. I picked up my 8-year-old at school, and he was talking to his friends, and we were just kind of walking to the school. I was holding his hand, and then he looked back at his friends and was like, my dad is a professor magician. So today I'm a professor magician. But I really love this field. I love studying how people communicate with one another. I earned all of my degrees, and I've been concerned about this my entire adult life. 12 years ago, I came to UALR as a young assistant professor, and I started thinking about some really lifelong questions. They sound like this. I want to share them with you. The first one was, what are some communication behavior that exemplify what we do when we're at our best? What are some small actions that we can produce every day that make a real difference across contexts, whether that's medicine or education or the interactions that take place at home? And I wanted to know, what are some small actions that we can intentionally think about and intentionally practice that would ultimately create a butterfly effect, right? That would create something bigger than ourselves. And I've been really puzzling over those questions, and I've done 3 things to try to answer them. The first thing was, I really kind of looked introspectively. I wanted to see my own communication. So what am I afraid of? When do I become most vulnerable? What are my challenges? When do I get really kind of a little edgy? And I wanted to study my own communication. The second thing I did is I looked for my own discipline. We've got lots of research across areas of study, and I wanted to know, what can my discipline teach me? What is the wisdom there? What are the concepts, the theories that will teach us something valuable? I interviewed 30 of the kind of the best scholars in my discipline, and I asked them questions. And in trying to do that, I kind of created a model of communication that I'm going to share with you. And the model sounds like this. It starts on top. When we greet, I believe that we have the ability to create human contact. I believe that when we ask questions, we can discover the unknown. I believe that when we compliment, we can affect people's sense of self. I believe that when we disclose, we can deepen the relationships that we have with one another. I believe that when we encourage, we can give support. And that when we listen, we can transcend the differences between us. I'll argue today that if you practice these kinds of behaviors, that if you use positive communication, you'll be able to create high-quality relationships at home and at work, and in a small way, ignite social change. So what I'll do for the time that we have remaining is just unpack this a little bit more deeply so you can know how to put it into action into your own life. Here I propose that when we greet, we have the great opportunity to create human contact. And the first thing that we found really is that greetings occur in every single culture that we can think of. Right? They exist everywhere. If you go to France, it's bonjour. If you go to China, it's ni hao. If you go to Saudi Arabia, it's assalamu alaikum, beautiful greeting, peace be upon you. And if you go to India, it's namaste. I see the light in you. I see the highest part of you, namaste. And so if we think this way, one reason that cultures have greeting sequences in place is because greeting is the way that we acknowledge one another, right? That we respect one another. That we say, hey, I see that you exist. I see that you're there, and I'm going to acknowledge that. And so I believe that greetings are at the heart of how we create human relationships. And the research shows that it really is critical. For example, in the context of medicine, when a physician greets a patient, it communicates a deep respect that facilitates the delivery of care. In education, when teachers greet their students, it actually affects their learning. In marriages, scholars who've studied people who've been married for over 50 years, and this is going to be depressing, reflecting only 3% of all relationships, one of the top 5 behaviors, greeting. They think greeting is really at the heart of how you maintain a good relationship. And we know it's really critical at work. Not too long ago, I visited a workplace where people were really divided. And one of them pulled me to the side and closed the door and said, you know, Julien, you have to understand, when I walk down this hallway, no one greets me. No one even understands that I exist. And it was kind of the mark that the place was in a toxic environment. I believe that if you think this way, you can recognize the power of greetings and make decisions every day to create human contact, one moment at a time. The second part of the model is about the power of questions. I really like this. One of the cool things about questions, if you just look at the word question, right inside the word is the word quest. So really when we ask questions, we're trying to go on a quest, right? We're trying to discover what we do not know. And the good thing is everybody in this room has a story, and if we could just find out ways of asking the right questions, we would discover each other a little bit more deeply. So when I talk about this part of the model, I ask people to think, what kind of questions do you ask every day? Can you find ways to flip your questions? And I just want to give you a couple examples. So imagine on a Monday morning, you've had a long weekend, and you're just walking in, and you probably just cannot wait to get to your office, right? And then on the way, you'll see some of your colleagues, and you'll be like, hey, did you have a good weekend? And what you want is a yes, no, so you can go back to work. Am I right? Yes, no, can we just close this encounter? Here, what you're trying to do is close the encounter. Flipping a question means you're going to try to open it up. So what if in that Monday morning, you want to go to your office, but instead, you go to the person and said, hey, how was your weekend? Tell me about your weekend. What did you do? Now you've opened up the question. And when you open and flip your question, what you're doing is you're flipping the script of what's going to happen in that interaction. Well, here's another example. You come home at night after a long day, cannot wait to sit down and watch your favorite TV show, right? And you're talking to your spouse, and probably your tendency will be to say, did you have a good day? Yes, no. Can I go watch my show now? Can I close down this encounter? What if in that moment you would open it up and you would say, hey, tell me about your day, my love. And you just notice that one shift would change everything about that interaction. It's the power of asking questions. When we ask questions that are kind of a little bit more open, I believe that we can discover a little bit more about one another. This part of the model is really important to me. Here I propose that when we compliment, we have a chance to affect people's sense of self. But the word affect is really the key word that I'll focus on today, because it's one of the most powerful lessons in our field, that when we communicate, we do not just share information. That's the way most people think about it. But that when we communicate, we affect who people are in the present, and we affect who people are in the future. What I say and do has that kind of power. And if you think of communication in that way, then you can start to ask yourself a couple questions. They may sound like this. To what extent every day does my communication affect people positively? To what extent does my communication every day affect people negatively? And you can even maybe narrow it a little bit more. You can say, how often do I criticize or complain or point out the weaknesses that people have? What if you flip it and you say, how often do I compliment? How often do I build people up? You know, and I was reminded of this. One of the professors I interviewed, his name is Jerry Phillipson. He's a professor of communication at the University of Washington. He told me this story that was really transformative for him. And it sounded like this. One day, he went to the office, like every other day, went to his mailbox, grabbed the mail, opened the mail, and what he found was an anonymous note. And the note read this: there are two kinds of people in this department. There are people who tear people down, and there are people who build people up. You are one of the latter. Whew, thank God, right? And he said, at first I was really complimented by that, but then I realized all of the times when I hadn't done that. And so it's from that moment on that I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to see if I can find opportunities every day to support people, to validate them, to see if I can build people up instead of tearing them down. And if I do that, maybe I can make a difference as a professional and as a person. And I think that's what this part of the model is all about, is can you use communication, and complimenting is just one example of affecting people positively. The fourth part of the model is about how communication is a way of disclosing our ways of deepening relationships. And it's probably one of the other really powerful lessons in our field, that when we disclose, we have the chance of deepening the connections that we have with other people. That intimacy, or the sense of connection that we feel with people, is not something we have, it's something we create. And the way we create it is through exchanging information about who we are, right? Here's who I am, who are you, and then we meet, and then we create intimacy and connection and a sense of closeness. But that can be hard. Disclosing who you are can be pretty challenging. And I was reminded of that when I interviewed Valerie Manusov. She's also a professor of communication at the University of Washington. And she told me this. She said, you know, I've been reflecting about my life as a communicator really pretty deeply. And she said, I realized I never knew the extent to which my own fear came across as not being open or as being reticent. And that is just not a very engaging way to be. And so she decided, she says, you know, I had realized when I looked at my life, all of the relationships that I had lost along the way, all of the missed connections, because I was not willing to be vulnerable and not willing to be open. This is what this part of the model is about, is can you find ways of being open with people? And we can do it in small ways by expressing love, by apologizing at the right time. But today we can do something too, right? There's about 100 people here, 200 maybe. What if at lunch we all decided to be vulnerable for a moment and picked up our phone, found somebody we're connected to, and just send them a quick text of gratitude and say, I'm thinking of you. I'm at a TEDx event today. I'm thinking of you, and I'm really grateful to have you in my life. And if we all do that, we can send hundreds of messages of gratitude into the world, and I think that's one way of creating social change. The fifth part of the model is to start thinking about communication, again, not just as a way of exchanging information, but as a gift, that when we choose to encourage, we can give people social support. And I think that communication is just as tangible as a way of giving as giving money or giving an object. And if you think about this that way, we really do this, right? We can give each other advice through communication. We can give each other affection through communication. We can give each other love through communication. Many ways. And we can transform any ordinary moment into an extraordinary one. When we ask people, what's the most memorable conversation that you've had? People come up with all kinds of examples, and most often they come from three sources, which I bet will cover people in this room. One, they come from parents. Memorable conversations come conversations with parents. Two, teachers. Three, bosses, supervisors. These are the most memorable conversations people have. And I know this is true in my own life. I was really affected by a mentor when I was a young faculty. The chair of the department at the time was Dr. Robert Ulmer. And I had been thinking about smoking, quitting to smoke. I loved smoking, actually. But I wanted to quit. And one day we were sitting down at Burger King, and he told me this. It really marked me. He said, you know, Julien, you know how you quit smoking? You do it one cigarette at a time. And I don't know what happened, but that clicked for me. And then from that moment on, I just decided to quit, and I was able to if I can just get past this one cigarette, I'll just move on to the next one. And then I'll move on to the next one. And now I've been smoke-free for 9 years. One conversation can impact a person. If you remember that communication is an act of giving, maybe you can transform your own ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. The last part of the model is about listening. And here I argue that when we listen, we can transcend the perceived differences between us and other people. You know, one of the biggest lessons I learned from interviewing all of these great scholars across my discipline was this. Communication is not about you. It's about other people. And that's why they thought listening was so important to human interaction. But it's really hard to do, right? I mean, we all know this. It's really hard to listen deeply because it takes a very high level of openness, being willing to consider alternative ways of thinking. It takes a lot of empathy, right? The ability to put yourself in the shoes of another person to go, hey, let me look at that world from their perspective. It takes the ability to have what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard, which means, can I approach this interaction with a deep respect, with some warmth, and then without any conditions? And then it takes the willingness to really kind of lean in, to be involved, to show the other person through your body and voice that you're engaged. Lots of kind of small details. And I can't unpack them all today, but I want to give you with a symbol. So do this for me. This is what listening is for me. Take your right hand and make a really tight fist. And I want you to feel that pressure, the tension there. Now, all I want you to do is open your hand so the palm faces up. This is what it means to listen. Listening is all about accepting. Listening is all about opening your hand. And the more you do that, the more you can connect and transcend the differences between you and other people. And by doing that, maybe we can make a difference too. So here's what I've done. You know, for the last 12 years, I've been really puzzling over some big questions. What communication behaviors make a really big difference across contexts? What are some small things that you can do every day, at home and at work, that will create some impact? What are some small things we can all do that will ultimately be able to help us create better relationships? Those are the questions that I've been puzzling over. And in trying to answer these questions, I came up with this model. And in summary, it kind of sounds like this. You know, when we decide to greet one another, we can create human contact. I believe that when we start to ask open-ended questions, we can discover what we do not know. We can discover the unknown. I believe that when we compliment, we can affect people's sense of self. We can make better choices and ultimately impact the people around us. You can see that little icon here, right? It's about building people up and kind of helping them grow. I believe that when we disclose, we're able to deepen the relationships that we have with other people. If we can just choose to be a little vulnerable, a little bit more open, then we can connect at home and at work. I believe that when we encourage, we can use communication as a gift, and that when we listen, we can transcend the perceived differences between us and other people. And that when we do that, when we practice these behaviors every day, then we have the great opportunity to inspire and influence the people around us. I really believe Krishnamurti is right. All we can do is alter our relationship with the world, and not the world of Europe or America, but the world of our home, the world of our work, and there we can bring change. And together we can create better social worlds. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.